It arises from a cold water mountain stream in the Blue Ridge at altitudes above 3,000 feet. It is home to a diversity of fish, birds, and other wildlife as it flows 100 miles from Beaufort Dam in the north to Chattahoochee Bend State Park in the south. And yet, how do you most often experience the Chattahoochee River? For many of us, the answer is when we cross it in our cars on 75 or 285. But what if the Hooch were more than something in the background of our lives? There's an ambitious vision to make that the case and transform 100 miles along the river into a more active space to commute or recreate via foot, bike, or boat while reconnecting neighborhoods along its path. It's called the Chattahoochee Riverlands. Cobb County, the City of Atlanta, the Trust for Public Land, and, you guessed it, ARC, the folks who power my microphone, are all behind it. The Chattahoochee Riverlands plan, well, it's huge and ambitious. It calls for a continuous 125-mile trail that follows the river and connects 19 cities across 7 counties. It also includes 25 new or improved river crossings and improves accessibility via 25 new trailheads. See, while the Chattahoochee is currently very accessible in more affluent areas, that's far from the case in every community along the river. And so a huge part of the project is equity, which is definitely one thing we're going to talk about today. It's also early days for this project. Unlike, say, the Atlanta Beltline, there's no dedicated funding source yet, no single entity driving the project forward yet. Instead, this is a plan requiring the collaboration of the region, and it's expected to take, ready for this, a generation or more to come to fruition. And yet those who have dedicated hours upon countless hours to creating this plan believe it's absolutely vital. Today, we're going to talk about why. This is What's Next ATL, the podcast powered by ARC, where we explore the big ideas shaping Metro Atlanta. I'm Kate Sweeney. We're joined today by 2 guests. First, Dr. Osbourne Jelks. She's an environmental health scientist at Spelman College and co-founder of the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance, or WAWA for short. She served on the Chattahoochee Riverlands Study Design Team, focusing on analysis of equity and environmental justice. Our second guest is Kate Orff. She's a MacArthur genius who's the founding lead of SCAPE, the firm whose design team led the Chattahoochee Riverlands planning project. In this conversation, Kate, Nataki, and I talk about the potential they believe the project provides to some of our underinvested communities and their residents, as well as the impact a project of this scale can have on our relationship with the natural environment around the river. Nataki and Kate, welcome to you both.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great.
So something it seems to me that you two have in common is a refusal to treat landscape as simply passive background. And I want to hear about what made you interested in taking part in this project. Nataki, let's start with you.
There were a couple of things here. I think I saw an opportunity along with my colleague, Dr. Richard Milligan from Georgia State University. I heard from SCAPE this acknowledgement that if we are going to consider in the least bit, issues around equity, then we've got to name that. And we have to have some folks on the team who are going to be working specifically on that. I've been around for a long time, been engaged in a lot of these, kind of public engagement processes, usually from the perspective of, just a resident and, through my affiliation with WAWA. But in most cases, it's basic. It's, we're going to have a few meetings and post some maps and things up on a wall and give people, colored sticky dots and ask them to vote on what they like the best. And so what I saw here was an opportunity to go beyond that, to try to address issues around equity head on.
And Kate, same question. What attracted you to this project?
Well, in your intro, you kind of mentioned the idea of not thinking about landscape as a background. I could not imagine a more significant or transformative landscape change than thinking about the roughly 100-mile public realm zone around the Chattahoochee Riverlands. moving from background or something that you drive over in your car into the foreground of people's lives, to be a sort of a force for connection, a place that really feels like a common ground and not like a piece of exclusive, parklands. And then also thinking about the Riverlands as an ecological treasure. We have had a century of development focused on the car, and that has brought about certain planning decisions and design decisions that have probably served to pull us apart in different ways. Yes, we all depend on our cars for the basics, but if we're thinking about what are the next 100 years for Metro Atlanta and this entire region, the idea of placing the Riverlands at the center of this vision seems to be just really powerful.
As you were talking, when you talked about refocusing the landscape and the way that we envision what Metro Atlanta is, it brought me back to being fresh out of college, and I just moved to Atlanta, and I was visiting with my sister, and she said, okay, I'm going to just draw you a quick map. This is Atlanta. And she turned over like a paper bag or something, and she drew the highway system. She drew 75, 85, 20, and 285. And she said, okay, yeah, right? I'm making hand motions that you guys are now mirroring on my Zoom call. And that is still how I conceive of Metro Atlanta in my mind. That is the map. And it's interesting to think that that could shift.
Well, I do feel like these broad, transformative, open, connective, physical landscape projects are the infrastructure of the next century. There are cities like Memphis that are trying to connect all of their riverlands along the Mississippi. San Francisco region is trying to connect around the South Bay Trail. And Atlanta is at the forefront of this effort. These are the projects of the future that are expansive and connective and really centered on landscape and justice issues alongside this kind of need for environmental stewardship to pull us forward.
So, Nataki, this project spans 100 miles. So we're talking about, and I looked this up last night, we're talking about from the Buford Dam, which is north of Sewanee, all the way along to the Chattahoochee Bend National Park in Coweta County, which is south of the city. It's big. And so we're definitely not talking about one homogenous community of humans. In fact, a lot of small communities with historic roots live along the Chattahoochee. Can you tell me about some of those places?
Great question. You've got this really interesting mix of the urban, the suburban, the exurban that are all sharing this 100-mile, corridor, but you just have varying opportunities for access or for the mental and physical health benefits that, having greenways and, connecting to the outdoors provides. And so this project really has that potential, to address, some of those disparities that exist.
So this is an opportunity to address disparities in access. But of course, one thing we've learned about a big improvement project like this is that it can also bring in gentrification and displacement. So what do you say to residents who are concerned about that, who are not excited to hear that there's a system of trails and improved water access coming to their community?
I think we tried to really emphasize in the planning document that access is not enough. That's kind of the first step. Making sure that communities who have historically not had access get that access is just an initial step. But that is not the magic wand. I see it a lot. We talk about these unintended consequences, of massive greening projects. And so I think we've seen it enough, whether we're talking about local examples like the Beltline or other examples from across the country. We've seen it enough now to anticipate it, to not call these things unintended consequences. My thinking is that if we're not being proactive about addressing these things, then we do intend for these, for some of these negative consequences to happen. And so we've got to have that forward thinking. We've got to have the all hands on deck approach. It's just as much about, access to the river and to green space and to this public realm as it is about making sure that there are housing options at various price points available, economic development opportunities, perhaps even job training, who's going to install the greenway, right? Perhaps even in folks' own communities. And what we really try to emphasize is that at whatever point these pieces of this project get picked up, because it is a multi-generational project, that we've always got to go back to centering, equity. We've got to look at the current context, the current, conditions, what's happening right now, and how can we put certain measures in place to make sure that all the parties who need to be at the table are at the table, so that we don't, as Kate mentioned earlier, sort of, silo this project into something that's just, about expanding access to green space. If we only focus on that, then we're going to miss out.
And related to that, one challenge of this project is to figure out ways of increasing public access while making sure that environmental protection is a priority. I'm wondering if some of the arguments are similar. I've seen some social media comments about this project, people saying, oh, no, leave the Chattahoochee alone. So first, I want to ask you, how could a project that brings people to a natural resource actually be helpful on an environmental level?
A Senegalese conservationist, Baba Diom, I think he said something like, in the end, we will conserve, only what we love. We'll love only what we understand, and we, understand only what we're taught, or you could say only what we're connected to, what we are able to have a relationship with. And so as we talk about increasing access to the Chattahoochee, we are thinking about environmental stewardship, and it's not just this, do nothing to it, but how can we inspire a whole new generation of people who want to not only enjoy, but conserve this space for future generations? And so people have to have those connections with it.
And there's certainly environmental impact taking place, whether or not we actually see it every day.
Well, personally, I feel like we need to get out of this concept that nature somehow exists outside of us and is healthier without us. We have already impacted the planet, intentionally or not. So I sort of feel that it is on us to choreograph those interactions in such a way that as the water becomes cleaner and cleaner, and as people see, the fish and the approximately 250 species of birds that migrate through or live here, that sense of wonder and appreciation will also evolve. I do feel like human hands and stewardship is the model of the future.
Then the Chattahoochee begins to be this household word, right? Where we're all connected to it. And that means that we're voting, in a way that will help to, conserve this space for future generations. We're acting in a civic manner in ways that support these efforts. And also there are job and economic opportunities also tied to conservation of this landscape, but also active and careful use of it.
One thing that repeatedly blows me away about this project when I think of it is the fact that it is multi-generational. And when I think about that, it kind of gives me the shivers a little bit. So how does knowing that this is a project that we will work on and that the next generation will continue to develop, how does that shape your approach to all the issues it entails?
Yeah, no, I have a couple different thoughts on that. One is it's incredibly easy to do the wrong thing very quickly, right? You can build a 6-lane highway faster than you could probably do one segment of the Chattahoochee, right? So business as usual is very easy and can be fast. But what's happening with the Chattahoochee is very different. Like we're carving a sort of a connective public realm through an existing landscape with all of its complexities. And so we have to acknowledge that that is a different mode of working, and it requires a kind of a persistent mindset and diligence. There's a planner named Lynn Ross who uses this phrase called moving at the speed of trust. And I think that's a great statement, because we can't move so fast that we somehow overtake that feeling of trust. And I wanted to give a shout out and generous thank you to, for example, the Chattahoochee Working Group, this incredible coalition of organizations with different priorities, different cities, people who are more interested in transportation or environment or ecology issues, but who all came together around this project. And it will take that coalition to move it forward.
I'll just add that in Atlanta and in the Atlanta region, that sometimes when things haven't been done before, it's like, oh, it can never be done. We're not even going to try because we haven't seen that before. And so, my hope is that we can sort of abandon that type of thinking and that we'll take on some of these bigger challenges, more audacious challenges, and just commit to pushing through and to work around, and to be creative in our thinking, about ways that we can address, some of those challenges, because this is multi-generational, because it, will be in some regards at the whim of current political leadership in, lots of jurisdictions. There may be some challenges that we're not even thinking about now that, can pop up. But if folks are committed, we've got to bust out of those silos and work not only across jurisdictions, but also across sectors, making sure that everybody's at the table who needs to be there to bring this from plan to reality.
I've got to say that for me, it is lots of fun to look through the maps and renderings for the Chattahoochee Riverlands project and think about, say, like biking along one of these trails once it's done. And it's especially the case in terms of where we stand in the COVID-19 pandemic. Do you see a potential for renewed energy around this now?
In Metro Atlanta, I think we have seen the enormous role that parks and green spaces have played in the midst of the pandemic. In fact, there are many spaces that are perhaps even overrun now because people have craved being outside for recreation, as well as the mental health benefits that, connecting to nature provides. So the more that we're able to experience diverse settings in nature and reimagine things like the Chattahoochee River, I think it will continue to be a part of our critical infrastructure and provide a host of benefits that in the end, we won't even be able to count them all up.
That's Dr. Nataki Osbourne Jelks, joined by Kate Orff. We'll provide links to learn more about the Chattahoochee Riverlands project, including an amazingly impressive map of plans for those 100 miles of river on the show notes for this episode. That's at whatsnextatl.org. If you're enjoying the show, tell a friend about us. And if you really like us, please rate and review us on Apple's podcast app. It helps people to find the show. And that's it. Till next time, see ya.